terrible harvest. Every week we would go, and I will admit our CSA share was very minimal last year. This year we've had record highs, and that's been bad for some crops, but for some crops like our tomatoes, they've been the best in 100 years. So this idea that as a community we have thrown our lot in with the farmer, and we said we want to share the risk of farming with you. We want to support you in times that are good and times that are bad. And today there are not more than 3,000, some people estimate even more, but at least more than 3,000 CSAs across the country. And I would argue that these CSAs are just one piece of kind of a patchwork of solutions that are all about reknitting, rebuilding these regional food sheds. And they're also, to me, really exemplify this idea of community. And I'll just give you one other example of kind of how this community value gets embodied. And it really is expressed, as I said, in the CSA, where the relationship between us and the farmer kind of upends a pretty fundamental principle of the market, that producers and consumers are necessarily opponents. Right? In a CSA, we're not trying to give the farmer the least amount of money, and he's not trying to steal the most amount of money from us. You know, we're really partners. And I saw this kind of upending of this fundamental principle of the market when I traveled to South Korea for research for my book. And I traveled there in part to meet with leaders of the consumer cooperative movement there. If any of you are familiar with the consumer co-op movement in South Korea, you know what a serious movement it is. I was completely new to it when I got there. And I kind of went into my first meeting with these consumer co-ops feeling kind of proud that I was from Brooklyn, where we have a food co-op that has 14,000 members. I was kind of proud of that. I thought we were a pretty significant force to be reckoned with. And then I sat down with the leader of one of these consumer co-ops called Hanselin's Co-op. And he told me that they have 150,000 members. And this is just one of several consumer co-ops that I met with. And he described to me a number of their programs that are about connecting the farmers with the consumers. Summer camps, for instance, on the farm for kids from the city, workshops on sustainable food production, investing in co-op-owned and run bakeries that stock mainly local food. And we had one of our meetings in one of these bakeries that was bought with co-op membership money, where members invested in the bakeries, and all the products were made from ingredients that were grown by co-op members. And he described to me that one of the core operations of the co-op is direct sale of hundreds of food items directly to the consumers, the prices of which are mostly decided at an annual meeting between the farmer representatives and consumer representatives. And he told me that every year they sit down together to talk about price. And that every year this conversation always ends with a really big fight. Now, it's not the kind of fight that you might imagine, but this leader of this co-op explained to me, he said, they always fight, and right is the most contentious. And I was still, as he was telling me the story, I was wondering, was I missing something in translation? What do you mean they're fighting? About what? And he said, well, this is what happens without sale every year. The consumers sit down, and they insist, they really insist, that they should support the farmers by paying more than the market price for rice. And the farmers insist, and they really, really insist, that no, the consumers should pay less than the market price, since the cost of production for them is lower than what the market's charging. And so then they get into a really, really big argument, with the consumers saying, no, we want to give you more money. And the farmers saying, no, we want to charge you less. We don't want to take more of your money. And how this co-op, Hanselin, achieved this really incredible shift in consciousness from producers and consumers seeing themselves as competitors to seeing themselves as on the same team, I think is really fascinating. And I asked one of these leaders of the co-op to explain to me how they achieved this. And he said that he really felt like it had to do with having this deeper conversation about our values. And as a result, he said, our producers see themselves as responsible for the health and the well-being of the consumer members. And the consumers, they know that the farmers are kind of in their hands as well, and that they want their farmers to stay on the land and to thrive and to be able to keep growing them really good food. And the consumers see very clearly how they are responsible for the well-being of the farmers. And to me, that story really embodies this value of community and the kind of consciousness shift, incredible consciousness shift that can come when we have that shift in the conversation and we start talking about our values. And the third value that I want to emphasize and close with is the value of fairness, or the value of justice. And justice in the food chain means a lot of things, and it also means, at heart, ensuring that all the workers and farmers and food producers are treated fairly and get a fair wage. And it also means ensuring that all consumers, no matter where they live or what tax bracket they are in, have access to healthy, good, affordable food. And there's a lot to emphasize here on this value, and a lot to discuss, both about what that value is, what it means, how do we work toward achieving it in our own communities. But let me just give you one example of kind of how one company grappled with this value. And some of you may have seen the news years ago, 2006 really sort of first came out, when the large consumer behemoth Walmart announced that it was going to move into the organic foods market. The New York Times that year had an article saying Walmart eyes organic foods, and within a year, some of the biggest organic food providers in the country were starting to sell to Walmart, including the farmer-owned cooperative Organic Valley. So over a few months, the Organic Valley's Walmart business grew exponentially, but as it did, what Organic Valley found is that they were starting to short its other customers, and the co-op board and its CEO, George Seaman, started questioning their decision to sell to Walmart. George said about this questioning, he said, all of a sudden it hit us. What are we doing? We're treating everybody poorly, we're damaging our reputation, and we need to decide what's important to us. George and the board's biggest concern was that Walmart would become the co-op's biggest customer, causing Organic Valley to lower its labor and production standards to meet, inevitably, Walmart's demand for lower prices. We've seen this happen again and again and again. This wasn't Organic Valley guessing this might happen, but Organic Valley seeing that this is what happens when you start doing business with Walmart. So for George Seaman and for the board, the decision to break away from selling to Walmart actually was a pretty easy one to make. They realized eventually Walmart could consume so much milk that the co-op could become beholden to one client and vulnerable to pressure to lower prices, violating its fundamental the Organic Valley's fundamental mission of providing fair prices to our farmers. And so Organic Valley walked away. And they don't sell at Walmart. And they returned to its focus of the mainstay of its business since the mid-1980s, since it started, which is selling at locally owned grocery stores and natural food stores across the country. So I think there's one example, and again, we could spend months talking about fairness and justice value, but I just bring this one story in to talk about how a business kind of grappled with where their values stood when it comes to fairness. Fairness both to their customers and also to their suppliers. And so these values, I talked about fairness and justice, ecology, community, are three of the many values that I think are at the heart of what we're talking about trying to build when we're talking about a sustainable food system. And, in the context of, when I got in last night, when we were getting the introduction to the dinner last night, Mark was saying that these past couple days here have been record highs in Kentucky, and it's been the same in New York, and I just spent a week in Portland, Maine, where the temperatures were over 90 degrees for 5 days in a row in Maine. Never, ever happened before in recorded history in the state of Maine. With sort of this very visceral experience of what I think is beginning evidence of real climate chaos, with the mega food recalls like those 500 million eggs that have been recalled, with the staggering rates of diet-related illnesses. I think that in the face of all that, sometimes it might feel like suggesting that supporting sustainable farmers and a sustainable food system and local food, even delicious ones like last night's meal, it might feel inconsequential, right? It might just feel like, how does this have anything to do with these huge things that we're up against? And yet I would argue that talking about food and shifting our food system is integral to all of these other challenges that we face, that food touches everything. And that choosing that local peach or local gelato, maybe, can be a sort of tasty reminder of our growing and unified and powerful vision for transforming food and transforming food in a way that helps us cool the planet and also feed the planet. And that in talking about our values and sharing the stories like we heard earlier today really helps us paint the picture of what are the solutions that we're talking about. And in a lot of ways I go back to that story of talking to the girl at Pine Mountain Settlement School about the mountains and getting us to see that the mountain, maybe it was always there, it's just that we might not have seen it until now. Thank you.
I believe the way it works now is, you'll have a seat.
Yes.
Joy will come forward and lead the discussion from this point forward, and then she will, or I will, invite the rethinkers forward, and our guests in Taiwan, and who about left out? Everybody?
You guys testify.
All right, let's see what
if we left anybody out who wants to be up here, just come on up here.
Declining wages, and so part of what we need to do is have a conversation about how to ensure that people are paid a fair wage and able to then be able to afford to feed themselves. But that's not going to happen overnight. We're not going to see that change overnight. And the second thing I would say is I would point to some of the really innovative policy that cities are trying to enact to essentially address this problem today, right now. And in New York City, for instance, there's a new program called the Health Bucks program that, through funding that the city has gotten both from the state and also federal money, it's a program where every time you use food stamps at the farmer's market, for every $5 of food stamps you use, you get $2 worth of Health Bucks that you can use on fruits and vegetables at the farmer's market. So it essentially brings down the price of fruits and vegetables at the farmer's market by about 40% for those people who are spending their money there. What we found in New York City is that, of course, it's really dramatically increased the amount of people who are redeeming food stamps at the farmer's market. It's really encouraged people to be getting more fresh fruits and vegetables. The state of Michigan just started a similar program, but even better. It's 1-to-1. In other words, for every $5 you spend, you get $5 more to spend. So I think that there are